Beryl Markham. The Daily Express, 19th August, 1936. London, England. I am going to set out to fly the Atlantic to New York. Not as a society girl. Not as a woman, even. But as a pilot with 2,000 flying hours, mostly in uncharted Africa, to my credit. The only thing that really counts is whether one can fly. I have a license. I can take an engine apart and put it back. I can navigate. I am fit, and given ordinary luck, I am sure I can fly to New York. This is to be no stunt flight. No woman's superiority over man affair. I don't want to be superior to men. If I can be a good pilot, I'll be the happiest creature alive. Chapter 1. 1912, Green Hills Farm, Joro. British East Africa, present-day Kenya. Beryl sat bolt upright, her heart beating faster. Alone in her mud hut at night, she expected to hear certain noises. The rustling of insects burrowing in the thatch roof, the snorting of the horses, and sometimes even the roar of a lion in the valley. But these ordinary noises had suddenly stopped. "Buller, did you hear something?" she whispered. The only answer in the darkness was her dog's snore from the polished mud floor of her hut. "Some watchdog you are." Holding her breath, she listened carefully. Beryl ran her hand under her monkey skin bedspread, searching for her trusty bushman's friend. Taken secretly from her father's hut, the vicious blade was sharp enough to deal with anything. Brushing the mosquito netting aside, she swung her legs off the bed and crept to the door. The only thing between her and the night was a thick burlap sack secured to the doorframe with leather ties. She tugged the ties open, drew back the rough cloth, and slipped outside. With a heavy sigh, Buller lumbered to his feet and joined her. The cold, clear air drove away her drowsiness. Dressed only in one of her father's old nightshirts, she shivered as the chill sliced through the fine linen. The moon was just rising, illuminating the vast valley dropping away at her feet. Beryl turned toward the pitch-black forest behind her. She stared long enough for the trees to take individual shape. Her father had forbidden her to go into the forest alone. Any danger would come from there. Buller lifted his head and sniffed. He whined deep in his throat. "What do you smell, boy?" Beryl asked. She tried sniffing too, but inhaling the cold air burned her nostrils. She glanced over at her father's rondavel, 20 yards away. Like her hut, it was covered with a thick straw roof. Until the big house was finished, her father's house was as tiny as hers. Most settlers slept in their own huts. The mud buildings were quick to build and lasted for years. A thin line of light illuminated the sacking of her father's window. He would be doing the accounts. By day, he drove himself and his men to exhaustion. At night, he tried to make the Green Hills farm profitable by writing numbers in different columns. He would be furious if she interrupted his work to report an unusual silence. Beryl took one last hard look around. She didn't see anything, but her father always said that what you don't notice in Africa can get you killed. Glancing into the clear sky, she saw Orion the hunter, outlined in the stars. He was an old friend. Her view was blocked by an owl, wings extended, who glided above her head with a soft hoot before disappearing into the valley. What must it be like to soar over the trees and meadows, to see Africa from up high? To be afraid of nothing, to be able to see danger in the dark, not just have vague worries about strange silences. She slipped back into the safety of her hut, ducking under the burlap door. Buller lay down in his usual spot at the end of the bed. The day after her mother had abandoned Beryl and her father, Beryl had persuaded Buller to sleep with her in the tiny hut. He was as unlike Mamma as it was possible to be. She was aristocratic and beautiful. Buller was an ugly mutt, a mix of bull terrier and sheepdog. But while Mamma had left Africa without a backward glance, Buller was still her loyal friend who never left Beryl's side. Daddy said Mamma left because the size of Africa frightened her, and she wanted indoor plumbing. Beryl could no longer remember her mother's face, but the sting of her mother not asking Beryl to go with her still smarted. Nevertheless, she managed just fine, alone with her father, Buller, the horses, and Africa, with the nearest neighbor miles away. Beryl threw herself into bed, tucking the mosquito netting around her body. Holding her knife tightly, she stared into the darkness, listening hard and pinching herself to keep awake. Later, when it was all over, she wondered what would have happened if she had remembered to tie down the burlap door. If she had not been so careless, would the danger have passed her by? Her only warning was a patch of lighter night by the door. The leopard must have slunk in, crawling soundlessly on his stomach the way cats do, ears flat to his head, spotted fur standing up on his back, eyes fixed on his prey, waiting, waiting. Buller's anguished yelp filled the hut. When she heard the deep yowl, she knew it was a cat, probably a leopard. Beryl huddled beneath the safety of the mosquito netting, afraid the cat would finish off Buller and then go after her. "Buller, be careful, boy!" Beryl screamed at the top of her voice. She waved the knife in the dark. She couldn't see what was happening, but she could hear Buller's low growl. She imagined that the leopard was poised to spring onto her bed. "Daddy!" she cried. She ripped off the blanket and snapped it toward the battling animals. Even if she had the courage, Beryl knew she couldn't join the fight on the floor. She was just as likely to hurt Buller as help him. Beryl could make out the leopard's shadow, spotted even in the dimness. It sprang onto Buller's back and sank its sharp teeth in the loose skin at the back of his neck. "Daddy!" Beryl heard what sounded like Buller's back cracking as he tried to shake off the cat. Before she could scream again, the leopard had dragged her friend out of the rondavel. Buller's cries ended as suddenly as they began. She leapt out of bed and ran into the bulk of her father. He was in the doorway, carrying a hurricane lamp. "Beryl, are you hurt?" He ran his hands lightly over her head and body, as if checking the soundness of one of his thoroughbreds. "What happened?" "A leopard got into the hut." "What? Where?" "It's gone. He took Buller." A sob escaped her. "Daddy, Buller's hurt. We have to go get him." "Be quiet, Beryl. Crying won't help him now." He stood up and cast the lantern's light around the room. "Let me look." He knelt to the floor and touched a spot. He brought his finger to his nose. "Blood. Whether Buller's or the cat's, I don't know." He glanced around. "How did he get in? Didn't you close the door?" She closed her eyes and sobbed. "It's all my fault, Daddy." "Beryl, stop caterwauling. Answer me. What happened?" The lamp cast a ghostly light on the sharp planes of his face. His grey eyes were unyielding. "I got up in the night, Daddy," she admitted. "I forgot to tie the door down." "How many times have I told you?" He shrugged. "Careless." "I'm sorry, Daddy." "It's a hard way to learn your lesson." He shook his head, and the lines of his face softened just a bit. "Daddy, we have to find Buller and save him." Tears streamed from her eyes. "Please help me, Daddy." Her father stared at the pool of blood on the floor of her hut. He didn't answer. "Please, Daddy, please." Clutching her knife in one hand, she grabbed her father's hand and squeezed hard with the other. "Where did you get that knife?" he asked. "I don't remember," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Come on, Daddy. We have to save Buller." He shook his head. "Beryl, it's too late. Either the dog will survive or it won't." Beryl didn't say a word, but her whole body trembled with pleading. "Don't look like that," he said with irritation. "A farmer's daughter can't afford to be sentimental about animals." "Please," her words came out in a croak. "Buller was Mama's dog." "Oh, for pity's sake," he burst out. He pulled his hand away and wiped his brow. "Get your boots on and we'll take a look around. But it's probably a wasted effort." Biting her lip to keep from crying, Beryl pulled on her boots. She followed her father into the compound as he tracked the spots of blood into the forest by the light of his lantern. There was so much of it. On the leaves of bushes, in pools on the ground. Wherever they followed the blood trace, the forest was silent, as though all the animals and night insects were holding their breath. The nest of ancient trees and vines was even more ominous at night. After a few 100 yards, they lost the trail. "Beryl, there's nothing we can do." "I'm sure he's around here somewhere," Beryl insisted. "I think I hear him." Holding the lantern above their heads, her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "Even if Buller fought back, he's badly wounded. False hope is worse than no hope at all, Beryl, especially in Africa." "But—" "No buts. If I have time tomorrow, we'll look again, but Buller's almost certainly dead. I'll get you a new dog." "But—" "Not another word, young lady, and you'll sleep in my hut the rest of the night. I don't trust you to be sensible." He turned and began the trek back to their small compound of huts. Dashing the tears from her cheeks, Beryl cast a last look into the undergrowth. "Don't die, Buller. I'll come for you," she promised into the darkness. News Chronicle, London, England, 3rd September 1936. Editorial. We hope Mrs. Beryl Markham will never take off. The time for these pioneer solo flights in overloaded radioless machines has passed. If she came down in the ocean, she would cause prolonged suspense to all her friends, and considerable inconvenience and expense to all the ships who would have to search for her. We hope that Mrs. Markham will think better of it. Chapter 2. Eyes squeezed shut, Beryl listened to the noises of her father getting ready for the morning. She lay perfectly still until she heard his voice outside, berating the workers in his British-accented Swahili. As she swung her legs off the extra cot in his hut, a furry, bony hand grabbed her ankle. She stifled a scream. "Simmy, you are the most useless pet." She kicked at the baboon and chased him back under the bed, a favorite hiding place. "I don't know why Daddy doesn't just skin you for a blanket. Buller is worth 100 of you." She pulled on her usual clothes, a man's shirt tucked inside a pair of khaki shorts, cinched tight with one of her father's belts. For warmth, she tied a blanket around her shoulders. She pulled on her boots and strapped her father's machete to her belt. Its long blade was useful to clear underbrush, but she had another use for it today. If she found that leopard, she would need more than her little knife to protect herself. Opening the door slowly, so as not to attract attention, she was relieved to see her father striding down to the stables, barking out orders. She hugged the outer wall of the hut until she was out of sight and headed into the woods. The forest was forbidden territory. Her father would be furious. She glanced back. She could still see the huts of the farm behind her. But after a few more steps, the shadowy trees and dense underbrush engulfed her. It was easy enough to find their path from the night before, because the leaves were still bruised. She followed the trail deeper into the forest until she reached a small clearing and the blood trail disappeared. All around her, she heard the forest beginning to stir. She didn't know where to go next. The chittering of the monkeys mocked her failure. Into the glade, she whispered, "Bulla, I'm sorry. I was stupid. Stupid, stupid." The sun rose higher, and the night shadows receded. She would have to return before her father noticed she was gone. But how could she go back without Bulla? She perched on a rotten tree trunk and sank her head in her hands. The hairs on the back of her neck began to tingle. Something was watching her. Had the leopard come for her? She lifted her head slowly and peeked through her fingers. Standing at the edge of the clearing, not 10 feet from her, was a native boy. She'd often watched packs of boys like this marching on the road. The red cloth of his shuka, the toga the natives wore, was like a splash of blood against the green leaves. Beryl swallowed hard, dropped a hand to her machete, and forced herself to look him straight in the eye. His face looked as if it was chiseled in polished black stone. A fluttering of a startled bird in the underbrush made her suddenly appreciate how far she was from home. "Who are you?" she asked. The boy stepped into the clearing, a patch of light shining on his shaved skull. He stared at her and shook his head quizzically. Beryl switched to Swahili, a language she had spoken since she was a toddler. "Why do you spy on me?" He answered, "I am not spying. I am looking for a foolish white girl who has gotten lost in the forest." He was about the same age as she, Beryl realized, and her fear left as quickly as it had arrived. "Then you must be looking for someone else, because I'm not lost. I'm looking for my dog." "Why was your head in your hands?" he asked. "Is your dog hiding there?" "I'm thinking. You wouldn't understand." Suddenly he grinned, and his bright white teeth transformed his face into that of a possible ally. "My name is Chibi. I am from the Nandi tribe," he said. "Beryl," she answered with a small smile of her own. "I'm British." His mouth shaped the unfamiliar name, and he tried a few times to pronounce it. "I'll call you Beru," he said finally. "You are the daughter of the captain. He said your hair was the color of a lion." He reached over and with one finger touched her hair, which lay wild and tangled around her shoulders. Beryl didn't flinch. Ever since she could remember, Africans had wanted to touch her blonde hair. "My father sent you?" she asked. "He said you were in the woods, even though he had forbidden you to go. It was Arap Minor who sent me to find you." "Who is Arap Minor?" she asked. "My father. He has come to work for your father, Captain Clutterbucky." "Clutterbuck," Beryl corrected. "How did you find me?" If Chibi had found her so easily, perhaps he could help her track Bulla. "You left the trail like a wounded warthog." Chibi stood even taller. "I am a hunter." "Can you find my dog? A leopard took him last night." "It happens." The boy shrugged. "But it is only a dog. In my village we have many dogs." "Bulla is not just a dog," Beryl said. "He is my only friend." The boy looked at her for a long time without blinking. "Then I will find him," he said finally. You lost the trail here? He asked, looking carefully around the clearing. Beryl nodded. Chibi headed into the underbrush for about 10 yards. Beryl stood up and brushed the bits of rotten tree from her shoes. Remembering what her father had said, she didn't dare hope too much. She spoke to his back. Do you see anything? Shh, Chibi said without looking at her. You talk too much. He began moving about the forest, spiraling out from their starting point in wider circles. Blood, he said, showing her a speck on the ground. He loped into the forest, his feet making no sound. Beryl followed as best she could. He finally paused along a stream. I have heard elephants that run more quietly, he said, frowning. A hunter as loud as you would starve. Beryl could feel her face redden like a sunburn. I've never hunted, she admitted. Of course not. You are a girl, he said. He knelt down and touched an area of churned-up mud. That is your leopard. He is still dragging your friend. He seemed to read the ground as easily as Beryl's father read the racing forms. Chibi followed the stream and Beryl trailed behind him. She looked around curiously. She had never been this deep in the forest. Brightly colored birds flew out of the bushes, cawing loudly. A stick cracked. She whirled around to face nothing. Beryl, we are close, Chibi said, brushing aside tree branches overhanging the water. Here. Bulla! The dog lay on his side in the mud, his snout near the water's edge. His jaw was pierced through. Beryl guessed the leopard had tried to crack it in two with its sharp teeth. There were long gashes in his black and white coat, and his fur was caked with blood. He wasn't moving. He's dead, Beryl cried. Chibi shook his head. The dead don't bleed, he said, pointing to the blood oozing from a cut on Bulla's cheek. The dog's eyes flickered open, and his tail thumped weakly. His eyes closed again. Dashing away her tears, Beryl closed her own eyes in thanks. His injuries are very bad, Chibi shook his head. You should kill him now. He would suffer less. Bulla is tough, Beryl said, her voice trembling. She cleared her throat and began again. Help me save him. Scooping water in her hand, she began to wash away some of the dried blood from the dog's snout. It is a waste of time, Chibi said. Chibi, please. She laid her hand on his forearm. He started, like one of her father's horses when a fly landed on its flank. But then he relaxed. Wait here. He was swallowed up by the thick underbrush in seconds. Beryl cradled Bulla's head in her lap and stroked his favorite spot behind his ears. He moaned, and for the first time Beryl knew the sound of agony. It's all right, boy, she said. Hold on. The forest seemed suddenly quiet. She looked at the thick greenery that surrounded them as far as she could see. What if Chibi didn't return? She couldn't get Bulla home alone. But no sooner did she doubt him than Chibi emerged from the underbrush, holding a bunch of green leaves. What is that? She asked. My father taught me healing. This plant is good dawa, he said. She nodded. Good medicine. He packed Bulla's worst wounds with the leaves. Then he pulled Beryl's blanket from around her shoulders and wrapped it around the dog. With deft hands, he fashioned a sling so that he and Beryl could share the burden. Beryl watched with growing admiration. He had skills she had only dreamed about. Sweating in her thin shirt, she staggered as she helped Chibi carry Bulla's 60 pounds out of the forest. Hold on, boy, she whispered. Chibi, in the lead, glanced back, but didn't say a word. She wondered if he understood any English. Beryl had completely lost her bearings, so when they emerged from the forest, she was startled to see her father's compound only a few 100 yards away. "Quick," she said, "to my hut. We can get Bulla inside before Daddy sees us." But they had covered only half the distance to the hut when they heard an angry voice. "It's my father," Beryl said. "And mine." Chibi stopped dead in his tracks, forcing Beryl to do the same. Bulla whimpered. Beryl took a firmer grip on the sling. The captain, who was of modest height, looked taller as he strode over. Beneath his short-cropped hair, his face was red with anger. "Beryl Clutterbuck, I'll have your hide for this." Following him was an African man who looked like a grown-up version of Chibi. He was tall and thin, with skin like polished leather. Unlike Chibi's, his skull was wrinkled. A shuka was draped elegantly around his body. He wore dozens of necklaces made of wire and earrings that dangled down to his shoulders. Around his upper arms, iron bracelets pressed into his skin. "Daddy, we found Bulla," Beryl said. "Did I not forbid you to go in the forest alone?" her father asked. "I know, but Bulla—" "No buts. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is out there?" With his thumb and forefinger, he rubbed the bridge of his nose. Beryl was startled to see how tired he looked. "I don't have time to worry about you gallivanting in the woods." "But we found him. I couldn't follow the trail, but then Chibi helped." Her father's fists clenched and unclenched as though he were just keeping from striking her. Beryl fell silent. "How badly hurt is he?" he asked. "Because it would be just like you to risk your life for a lost cause." He unfolded a bit of cloth and looked at Bulla's injuries. He whistled under his breath. "I've half a mind to put him down just to teach you a lesson." Beryl gulped. She stared at her father and hoped the tears would stay behind her eyes. The captain hated weakness. Only strength could save Bulla now. Chibi whispered to his father in a rapid language Beryl couldn't quite understand. Arap Minor stepped forward. "May I look at the animal, Captain?" he asked very respectfully. The captain gave permission in his clipped Swahili. "Go ahead, Arap Minor. I think it is hopeless, but my daughter loves the animal." Beryl and Chibi lay Bulla on the ground. Beryl held her breath as Arap Minor checked the wounds. He straightened up and faced Captain Clutterbuck. "Sahib, with care, the dog will live. Your daughter need not be sad." Beryl exhaled. "Good, she can take him with her to England," the captain said. He held up a hand to stop Beryl's howl of protest. "Beryl," he said in English, "if you keep running wild, you're going to get yourself killed." "I want to stay here with you," she pleaded. "You need me. I'm your best stable lad. Who else can ride like me?" "I can't run the farm and keep you out of trouble at the same time." He was implacable. "But, Daddy, this is my home. Please don't make me go." Chibi whispered to his father again, and Arap Minor interrupted Beryl's pleas. "Sahib, perhaps I can care for your daughter." "You were hired to supervise the men," the captain said with a frown, "not to be a blasted nanny to a little girl." "I'm nearly 11. Beryl fell silent at her father's look. "I have come here to work," said Arap Minor, "but also to teach the Totos, the children of the tribe, the ways of the Nandi. I can teach your daughter as well." Daddy, I'd be safe with him. You wouldn't have to worry anymore. Beryl wanted to jump up and down with excitement, but she dared not fidget while her father considered Arab Miner's offer. She wouldn't be a nuisance? Her father asked slowly. No, Sahib. The children of our tribe are just as likely to get into trouble. Arab Miner glared at Chibi, who dared to laugh. My son says she has the tread of a water buffalo, but she learns quickly. And she is a loyal friend. The captain stared at Beryl, taking in the blood-stained shirt and the cuts and scratches on her bare legs. Arab Miner, I accept your offer. Since her mother left, she has been nothing but a worry to me. Beryl's heart suddenly felt like lead. Her father's thoughts and eyes were already wandering down the hill, where the grist mill was. Half the farm's income came from grinding maize, but Beryl could see the wheel had stopped. The native workers were beginning to drift away to other tasks. The captain pulled out his pocket watch and made an impatient noise against his teeth. To Beryl he said, Young lady, Arab Miner is a warrior and important in his tribe. Don't give him any trouble. I need his men to work the farm. Yes, Daddy. And take care of that damned dog. Shaking his head, he returned to the business of farming. Beryl watched her father walk away. She took her eyes off his back only when Arab Miner began to speak. We must consider this leopard who comes into Clutterbucky's daughter's house. He is too bold. Beryl nodded, although his words made her nervous. She knew firsthand how fierce that leopard was. He continued, But for today, Chibi will show you how we heal our animals. Chibi stood up even straighter, a wide smile on his face. And perhaps tomorrow you can visit our village and meet the other Totos. Beryl could barely say a word. Her day had started with nothing. But now she had her dog, a teacher, and a friend. Interview with Beryl Markham, Nairobi, Kenya. Date unknown. By the time I was 26, I was not only the first woman racehorse trainer, I was one of the most successful in Africa. The life and job had been enough for my father, and I always thought it would content me as well. Until I saw an aeroplane. There weren't many planes yet in Africa. Something about the preposterous combination of combustion engines and wings stirred my imagination. One day, some friends brought me to the Nairobi airstrip, such as it was, to see a plane land. The flying machine had to circle half a dozen times until the zebras and the wildebeests were chased off the runway. The pilot's name was Tom Black. We got to talking about flying. Tom wanted to start a business delivering mail and medical supplies to villages so remote they weren't on any map. He said that even if Africa didn't have roads, there was land enough for the wheels of planes and sky enough for their wings. That night, I went back to the stable and said to Arap Ruta, my head lad and good friend, I think I'm going to leave all this and learn to fly. Arap Ruta stood in a loose box beside a freshly groomed colt whose coat gleamed like light on water. He shrugged and dusted his hands, one against the other. If it is to be that we must fly, Memsab, then we will fly. At what hour of the morning do we begin? Simple as that. I left my old life behind and began a new adventure.